Hi, I'm Anna. Today is May 19th. Putin just landed in Beijing. But he arrived to a very different welcome than the one Trump got. The red carpet was smaller. The ceremony was quieter. And China's state media covered it mostly by quoting foreign sources. Meanwhile, back in Moscow, Ukraine just launched its biggest drone strike on the Russian capital since the war began. The oil refinery hit. And Russian state TV? Almost completely silent. Add to that, China's four biggest state oil companies have stopped buying Russian crude by sea. And the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, Russia's last hope for a mega gas deal, is still stuck, still stalled, with Beijing holding all the leverage. This is what a declining partnership looks like from the outside. Let's break it all down. Putin's visit to Beijing was described by sources familiar with the matter as unlikely to feature the same scale and pomp seen during the US-China summit just days earlier. Anonymous sources characterized the trip as part of Moscow's routine dealings with Beijing, with little expectation that there would be an elaborate parade or welcome. Compare that to Trump's arrival last week, military honors, a full state reception, and Xi personally hosting a bilateral summit. Putin's visit, by contrast, is expected to be more practical as part of routine dealings between the two countries. The optics are impossible to miss. Trump came as a peer. Putin came as a supplicant. China's Global Times tried to spin the back-to-back visits as evidence that Beijing is fast emerging as the focal point of global diplomacy, but Washington is closely watching what actually emerges from the Putin meetings, particularly around energy and any potential military assistance. The timing of Putin's visit couldn't be more awkward. On the night of May 17, Ukraine launched one of its largest ever drone strikes against Russia, with Ukrainian President Zelensky saying the drones flew more than 500 kilometers from Ukrainian territory, and that Ukraine was overcoming Russian air defense systems concentrated in and around the capital. At least 3 people were killed and over a dozen wounded. Residential buildings were damaged across several suburbs, and Moscow's oil refinery was struck in a rare direct hit. The attack was the largest and most deadly to target the Russian capital region since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And what did Russian state television do? Russia's national TV networks almost entirely ignored it. Channel 1, Russia 1, and NTV reported the deaths only briefly in Sunday morning broadcasts, hours after the attack. By the afternoon news programs, the attack had disappeared from coverage entirely. The lead story across all Sunday evening programs was a successful Sarmat missile test. Putin flew to Beijing while Moscow was still smoldering. And his own state media pretended it hadn't happened. Now look at what China has done with Russia's oil. At least 4 of China's state-owned oil companies, PetroChina, Sinopec, Sinopec, and Genoa Oil, have temporarily suspended purchases of Russian oil shipped by sea, following new U.S. sanctions on energy giants Rosneft and Lukoil. The pause is driven by fears of secondary sanctions. Between them, Rosneft and Lukoil export 3.1 million barrels of oil per day, overwhelmingly to buyers in East and South Asia. China has purchased around 47% of Russia's oil exports since Europe cut off imports in 2022. Unlike state firms, independent Chinese refiners known as teapots remain the dominant buyers of Russian seaborne oil, accounting for most of China's roughly 1.4 million barrels per day of maritime imports. And pipeline oil, approximately 900,000 barrels per day, continues to flow normally. So China hasn't cut Russia off entirely. But the state companies, the ones that signal official policy, have stepped back. That is a message. And then there is Power of Siberia 2, the pipeline that was supposed to save Russia's energy future. The Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline remains stalled months after Gazprom signed what it called a legally binding memorandum with China, even as the Iran conflict has renewed Russian hopes that energy security concerns could push Beijing closer to a deal. Moscow sees the project as critical to replacing lost European gas sales after the invasion of Ukraine. Discussions are reportedly bogged down over pricing and the length of gas supply contracts. Beijing has reportedly called for gas prices aligned with Russia's domestic rates, while Moscow wants terms similar to Power of Siberia 1. Analysts say the Middle East conflict could improve the project's political prospects but is unlikely to fundamentally alter the balance of power in negotiations. One analyst put it bluntly, Gazprom has no one else to negotiate with, so all the leverage is on the Chinese side. The price for power of Siberia 2 is probably going to be lower than for power of Siberia 1. Putin is expected to raise the pipeline directly during his talks with Xi. Russian officials say China has expressed an interest in accelerating talks, but there has been no firm progress, and no dates or pricing terms have been agreed. Price negotiations could take years. And Beijing is expected to stick to its diversification strategy, discussing supply deals with both Turkmenistan and Russia simultaneously, keeping Moscow competing for access rather than locking in terms. This is what the No Limits partnership looks like in practice. Russia needs the deal badly. China doesn't. And Beijing knows it. Putin arrives with expectations. Xi holds the terms. The gap between those two positions is the real story of this summit, and it's a story Russia cannot afford to lose. What does all of this mean together? Ukraine is hitting Moscow with record drone strikes while Putin is out of the country seeking a better deal from a partner that just gave Trump a warmer welcome. China's state oil firms have paused Russian crude purchases. The pipeline is stuck. And Moscow's own media is burying the news of attacks on the capital. Analysts noted that Russia's situation reflects a combination of battlefield setbacks, a deteriorating economic situation at home, and an intensifying response against independent information, with ordinary Russians increasingly aware that the war is coming home. Russia is not collapsing. But it is being squeezed, from the west by Ukraine, from the east by a partner that extracts concessions without offering guarantees. Subscribe and hit the bell. This story is moving fast, and the next 48 hours in Beijing could tell us exactly how much leverage Putin has left.